that we have done, the government has imposed, and if there is a positive case in the salmons, what will be the likely lockdown measures that the government will do? That helped us to design and define for ourselves what are the trigger points, and with its trigger points, what would be the appropriate responses that we will have for each. And the trigger points are basically government responses to any cases in the salmons or government lockdowns imposed to prevent the country from coming, because that in itself, just the lockdown, preventing people from coming in, also had impacted the business. It had an impact on how we were doing things as business as usual. The way we planned our chlorine stock changed. We used to have, just at the end of the month, you have one month buffer stock, but we had to increase it to 2 months. Taking into consideration is the impact of lockdowns and quarantine measures imposed in the different ports around the world. So yes, whilst we looked at the core and critical processes, we also looked at the critical materials, critical equipments, critical tools, and critical consumables that we need to have to ensure that should there be a lockdown, we will continue to supply safe water to our customers. I think one of the things that helped us is we must first of all, as a team or as an organization, understand for ourselves what are the core and critical processes in the business that we need to have running. What are the core and critical processes? If it stops, then there'll be no supply of safe water to customers. That really helped define things a little bit better for us. It was a first, an eye-opener for us. It was a first experience for us. But I think the commitment of the teams, especially those involved in those core and critical processes, to be part of the planning, workshopping team, helped put this plan together. And the plan was also on a regular basis being reviewed and checked by the crisis management team, which is basically the top team, the head of functions or head of divisions in salmon water. In a nutshell, that's basically what I would like to share. Sorry, I can also add that some members of the salmon water team were part of the government response team or subcommittees and committees. That also gave us more insights into what exactly is happening around the different government departments and within the government plans for in response to COVID-19. So it helped kept us ahead or abreast of what the government is planning to impose should there be a positive case in the salmons. Nothing off the top of my head for now. I'm happy to chip in later on. But back to Francis and the other salmon water team members. Sorry, we did not prepare a presentation actually.
No, that's excellent, Scraven. No, thanks a lot to you and Francis and the team for your input there. Yeah, we did. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity to talk about your plan, as we'll use that as a template. So yeah, we'll draw on your experience there, you and your team, as we talk about some of the risks, how you identified it, some of the strategies in place. So that's really excellent. So thanks for sharing your experience. Did anyone have any questions before we press on and actually have a look at the plan in a bit more detail? So we've got the chat box. You should be able to access that at the bottom of your screen, I think. So if you've got any questions, any comments you'd like to make, feel free to drop them in the chat box. And yeah, maybe it'd probably really help us too. It's a little bit difficult for us today with a lot of people here just to work out who's here. So if you just drop a hello in the chat box down the bottom there, just so we know where people are from today, that'd be really helpful as well. Just to help us keep track, and we can make sure we get the video out to people who didn't join us. So yeah, see if you can find the chat box. I think it's down the bottom of the screen. If you put your cursor down there, you should be able to find it. Okay, so excellent, Scraven. That was really interesting how you guys have gone about it, and it's good to see that there's those common themes there that really resonated with me. That COVID is different. We might have BCPs, and I know here in Hunter Water we had continuity plan that dealt with the previous flu, which I think was the avian influenza. But when we had a look at that, we thought, well, the COVID-19 is different, so we've got a BCP that we can build on, but it actually is different, needs a different response. And it's great to see the collaboration in the team. So these response plans and the BCPs aren't something you get someone to come in and do for you. But it really, to develop these plans and a proper response, you need to draw on the experience of all of your team. So to get the minds of your business working on this. And part of this today is to get the minds of the water utilities in the Pacific working on it, so we can all learn from each other. So collaboration is key, and to making sure that, as we've said earlier, that these plans have got to be living things. So in total, your business continuity needs to be something that you review regularly. And the pandemic, because it's going on for so long, you can't just do a plan now and think in 12 months' time the plan will still be effective. You really need to keep reviewing this as you go through. So that was great. It really resonated with me, what you've done there. So fantastic. Has anyone got anything else before we press on? Okay, well, keep an eye on the time. We'll keep moving. So some of the common elements that we've talked about for all of these plans, that escalation, protection of employees, PPE, how people access facilities, so our own employees as well as our customers, how do they come to our offices? Here in Newcastle, they shut the office completely apart from the emergency control room. So no customers and no one that wasn't part of the emergency team. How do we share resources? So a few of the plans I've seen talk about sharing the vehicles, so you clean the vehicles. Here in Newcastle, they split the vehicle fleet into two teams. So they split the workforce into two and split the vehicle fleet into two, so a red team and a blue team. So a red team can't drive a blue team's vehicle. So there's all sorts of ways to do that in the plans. So splitting, sharing resources, splitting the workforce. And how do we work through lockdowns? So we've heard some good examples, sending people home, working remotely. In some cases, that's easier to do than other places. And external suppliers, it's a really key issue, I think, particularly for the islands where you might be a bit more remote. And I think some of the teams we've talked to are struggling to get, probably early on, to get some of the essential supplies in, as well as things like spare parts. And maybe if you rely on maybe some expat consultants for projects, I think it's hard to get the people to come back to continue your business. We've got to continue to get things done. So how do you get people in and out of your country? How do you get materials and essential supplies? But it's good to see those elements are in most of the plans that we've looked at in some way. So how do we complete a pandemic plan and bring all this stuff together? So I'll bring up the template that I sent around to people before. Bear with me while I find the right plan. How we going with comments? Vivian's anything coming through?
Not yet.
Okay, everyone's quiet.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Hopefully we haven't got everyone just surfing for the Black Friday specials on there.
There we go.
Right.
Coming up.
Is that COVID response plan on the screen?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So as I said, thanks again to Scraven, Francis, and the Solomon Water team. As I said earlier, this plan isn't necessarily the answer to an exam question about what's your COVID preparedness plan, but I really liked it because it's covered off on a lot of the elements we've talked about this morning. It's not that the others haven't, but for me, a lot of the things we want to talk about today are the risks that the business face. As we've been talking about, this pandemic's a bit different. It throws up a lot of other issues that we mightn't see, and some of the other things that we need to have continuity or response plans for. So what we did was took the Solomon Island plan and actually turned that into a template. Now, as I said, it's not necessarily the complete answer, but I think if you haven't got a plan, you could pretty quickly get together with your teams, and as Scraven said, it's a matter of collaboration. So get together with the people that might have some experience, be responsible for elements of your response to this, get everyone together and collaborate. And if you haven't got a plan, this is a great basis to start from. And I've had some good feedback this morning on this template where people have pointed out some things that probably haven't been included in this template that we should have a talk about. And I think for some of the others that are developing some plan, it's maybe help them a little bit along in the journey. So it's great collaboration and great sharing. So that's what this is about. It's just a guide. It's not the answer to COVID preparedness, but it's got a lot of great elements in it. We've made it into a template so that you can go through, and I've put in there that if you really needed to, just change where it says utility, your utility's name, and you can change the country. And if you do that, you've got the basis of a plan. But it's only as good as the implementation. So you might have a written document, but as we've been talking about, the plan needs to actually be put into practice. It needs to be rehearsed. So you can do desktops and actually run people through this plan so it's a living document that doesn't just sit on the shelf. It's important to identify who's responsible for a plan. So who are your business continuity planning members? Who's responsible for running a continuity plan and actually implementing it? You probably need to identify, if you haven't got one, a crisis management team. So who are the people that have got overall responsibility for the implementation of the plan? So we'd identify those up front in the plan, who's responsible. And then in this case, in Solomon Water's case, they've broken it up into 3 phases. I've seen some of their other plans, the Hunter Water one, they had 4 phases. Really, it's what makes sense to you. So in this case, preparation and prevention that we spoke about as one of the early continuity planning principles, how we respond and how we recover. So again, if you think back to the slides we had earlier on, they're probably the things that we put up there as the main elements. How do you prepare and prevent, respond and recover is what we're looking at. We've got a few comments popping up there. Vivian, anything? Yeah,
I think James raised the point on supply chain logistics.
Yeah, excellent.
Roel had also meant, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully we'll get to that. And Barry had a thought for me as well that he sent through this morning after he had a look at it. So we'll get to that one as well. Remind me, Barry, as we go through. So.
Yeah, and then John had maybe a broader comment. I think we can, if we have time at the end, we can discuss that.
Okay. Righto, keep me on track if there's anything that pops up. And feel free if you want to jump in with a comment, see if you can find a space and jump in. So the team identified the preparedness and prevention. So often these plans it's the same for all the continuity plans, you're better off doing it when the pressure's not on. So in the cold light of day, have a think through it. Like if the pressure's not on, you don't have COVID in your environment, what other things you need to think through now? What are the risks that your business would face? Because there's a lot of experience out there now with COVID. What are the controls you'll put in place? And again, who's responsible? Who's doing what and when? So responsibility in the time frame. And we need to regularly review the progress there. So what's the status? So what are the promises people making to implement the controls that need to be put in place to manage the risks that we face, and track the status of that. So some of the risks that were identified, and again, this is not an all-encompassing list of risks, but it's really a good guide, I think. So some of the risks there that the staff contract the virus, that's happened. It could be transmitted around workplaces, that's certainly happened. We've seen instances of high absenteeism for people that have to care for family members. We've had those situations here in our business. Impact on international supply chain. That's certainly a critical thing. Already we've seen right around the world, our supply chains are being disrupted. If COVID starts to get, breaks out before the vaccine's more widely available, that can certainly still happen, and even in a more serious way than it does around the islands now. What happens if you've got COVID lockdowns and things and you can't read meters and bill your customers? In some countries, probably not a problem because of automated metering. But in other places, here in Newcastle, it's all manual meters. About 230,000 meters need to be read. So what if the meter readers can't get out to read a meter? How do you sustain your business? What if customers have to travel to the office to pay the bills? How will that work? If you can't travel due to restrictions on public transport, so maybe in some of the islands not so much a problem, maybe in Manila where people travel a lot on public transport, what if the government says you can't use public transport? It happened here in Australia. So how do you get workers to work that need to come in if you haven't got access to public transport? Other critical functions, so what happens if you rely on external laboratories and things like that and they're not available? Limited staff to cover specialist roles, and we all face that you might have a lot of general people, but there's really some critical roles here that you might only have one or two people in your business. And what happens if they're not available? We all rely on third parties, unfortunately, and a lot of our continuity plans are to cover off on someone else's failure to deliver our service. As much as others rely on a water supply, we rely on power, telecommunications, and all those services. So what happens if those fail? Some companies might not take our promises to pay because cash flow is being gummed up. So you might find that some companies just can't or won't provide a service unless they can get paid. And paid in cash, they mightn't be happy to take credit from companies. So how would you get past that? Executive team unavailability. So there are critical roles in our businesses. So how would you overcome that possibility that your executives aren't available? How would you split that team? How would you keep that team apart? And the critical one that there's been a lot of discussions we've had at the moment is about revenues, so declining cash flows. So I think that's it's been difficult in Australia, but more so I think in the islands where there's a lot of reliance on tourism. It's really rocked the economies. People are struggling to pay the bills, and how is that going to impact on your business? How would you keep your business continuing to provide your services if your cash flow is depleted? What are the plans you put in place? So that's really a good range of risk to a business, I think. Before you even think about COVID's hit your jurisdiction, what are the things you can put in place to start to prepare for it happening one day? Hopefully it won't, but it might. Is there anything that people think that we probably should put in that list of things to do up front before COVID's even hit? It's pretty comprehensive, but anyone got any others they'd like to throw on the table?
Elma had a good point about the financing. So when utilities are already facing, reduced revenues because of the COVID impacts, how do they implement such plans? If there's any sharing from any of the utilities, Manilad, Solomon, how that has been managed.
Unfortunately, I think we're pretty used to managing constrained cash flows.
But this is on top, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know it's a real concern.
Yeah.
Right. Well, from a Solomon Water point of view, managing with very limited cash flow is business as usual, actually.
Yeah.
I think there was a good question asked by James as well. Do you want to share about? Do you want to talk about that?
I might just add some context here. So we run power as well as water and sewage, and we've got some really critical rebuilds of some generators that we need to do. And it's debatable whether or not we could do all of the work in-house. Traditionally, we haven't, but it's high risk work. And we would normally rely on bringing expert skill sets in to do that. But that would pose a real issue at the moment. So I guess it's exposing the business to greater risk. I haven't got the answer as to how we will go about it, but I'd be intrigued as to what others have sort of done if they've had similar issues.
I'm happy to share what we did in the salmons. It may not be the perfect solution, but this is what we did. We really had to look at the supply chain logistics side of things, not only from materials, consumables, and direct material sort of point of view, but also look at the critical utilities that we need, and that includes power. The discussion at the technical level or tactical level went as far as, because we do have standby gensets to power all our pumps around our pump stations. And we even went as far as looking at if we were to run on our own power, generated power through our gensets, how much of fuel requirements are we looking at? And that's where, coming back to the question on financials, it is looking at these actuals and coming up with the financial costing scenarios that has to be taken up to the top team or the crisis management team for the decision making on which is that helps shape our best options going forward. Further to that, in terms of power supply, we also had a chat with the power supplier locally, and look at the sort of, because everyone else was pushed into having their own COVID response plans. Now we had a chat with them, asking them to understand what are their COVID-19 response plans as well, in terms of ensuring that there's continuity of our supply. There was some level, there was a good level of confidence from for us in Solomon Water when we came to understand what their plan was. So the actual option of going down the path of buying fuel and stocking it on site to ensure that we can run on our own standby gensets was negated. But the importance of that, I guess, is that we are currently going through one crisis now as it is. Like I said, we beefed up our buffer stock at the end of the month from 1 month to 2 months for chlorine. But our chlorine stock, which is currently being imported from overseas, the last 3 shipments missed the boat or missed its time of delivery. And we have been forced to look at other options to ensure that we do disinfect our water. So had we not beefed up our end of the month stock to 2 months, the crisis would have been 2 months now for us. The crisis would have been 5 weeks now, as opposed to being in days only. But that's one of the key learnings in terms of the importance to look at the supply chain logistics side of things. Of course, those sort of calls will come with the financial impact, where there's more cash being tied in material form as opposed to in cash form in the bank accounts. But that's a risk, that's a decision that the crisis management team made, and we stuck with it. And in hindsight, it helped us.
Excellent. Yeah, so Roel, I think there was a question that popped up for you. Now, I'm just a bit mindful of the time, team, so I wanted to get to a couple of other aspects of this plan so we can have a chat. So, yeah, Roel, you might just like to jump in on that question there.
Yeah. Well, of course, the lockdown really, well, in terms of our operation, providing our water services, I think we were able to handle that well, because we're able to house our people in our facilities so that our plant run. But the challenge really is as regards the stoppage of our construction works out in the field, particularly as regards management, leak management, leak repairs, when there was a stick on. Also, there really although after a week, after so, government realizing the need to continue those work eases up the restriction